let's take a look at them. So I'm in a solution in make.powerapps. I can click new and go to environment variables. And what we'll do is we'll create a new one called VPG and var. Finally, we can give it a name, but we don't have to. And we can choose the data type. So we can choose decimal number, we can choose JSON, choose text, yes or no, or data source. So all of these kind of have like a good purpose. So decimal numbers are great if you need to store decimal numbers. Handy if you need to store things like version numbers and things like that. We're going to skip over JSON for now. I just want to come back to that. Text, if you just need to store some strings and things like that, it's really useful. Yes or no's, we can store those. So we could say, hey, is this production or is this live? If it's production, it's set to yes. If it's live, it's set to no. We're going to do certain actions if it's set to yes, we're going to do certain actions if it's set to no. And we also have the new one, data source, as well. So in fact, I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to call this SharePoint MCJ. Because we're going to use the SharePoint one first. So data source. Data source is the big one at the moment. This is the one that allows us to really get a grasp on the ALM for Power Automate. So the data source allows us to specify a data source for Power Automate to connect to. So at the moment, there is only the SharePoint connector, but Microsoft has said that they will release a Dataverse connector, which will help if you need to specify different Dataverse environments inside a single flow and use the most up-to-date connector. And they're also going to release a SQL one as well, which will be really cool. But at the moment, it's stuck to just SharePoint. So once we choose the connector, it's going to ask us for our connections. And I already have a pre-made connection here, which is just a connection to that data source. And then we have parameter type, so we can choose site or list. So if we choose list, I have a feeling this won't work. Yeah, it won't work. If we choose site, we have two values down here. So we have new site value and default value. So the default value is what will always be in this environment variable. So it's designed for when you move this from one environment to another, this will be that fallback. This will be that default one, but we can overwrite it in the environment that we're in. So for this one, we get a list of all of our SharePoint sites that we can access. So we can choose this MCJ one up here. And we can save it, and it creates that environment variable, and it will reference that URL. So that's great. We've got that, and it's just done in here somewhere in all this stuff, which I really need to tidy up. SharePoint MCJ. So we've got an environment variable, and that relates to this environment here, this SharePoint site. So if we go into a flow, and I'll just maybe refresh this for a second, just to make sure we get the latest environment variable, we can use a SharePoint action to see if this works. And this is where everything stops working. There we go. Come on. Everyone stop looking at my screen. It's shy. Okay, never mind. We'll just create a new one. There we go. Trigger, and we can search SharePoint. So what we'll do is we will, I don't know, list for all the SharePoint actions. Let's find a SharePoint action. Create file. How about that one? I don't know what no one does, but we'll figure it out. Right, cool. Now, site address. We have all of these site addresses. So previously, if we were doing this, we would have to go in here, we choose this one, and then when we go into our production environment, we need to remember, right, we need to go update that flow with that new site address in production, otherwise there's an issue, and that kind of causes an unmanaged layer if you're using managed solutions and has all sorts of other implications. So instead, what we can do is we can hit add custom value, and in here, we can use the direct content and search for whatever I called it, MCJ, SharePoint MCJ, there we go, and choose that one. And what's great about this is that when we move this flow from sandbox to production, it's going to get that environment variable value. It's not going to use a hard-coded in value. It's going to use whatever you store in that environment variable. And again, we can navigate through the paths. And this is one thing I think is really interesting. Is in here, I've created a list called VPG list, and there's also a couple of other lists, quiz answers and quiz responses. By using this environment variable, it preloads the metadata, and it knows that there is a list and there's a folder called VPG. There is a list called folder. If I had some sort of if statement in there where it needs to evaluate things at runtime, it's not going to know that. And that's why this is powerful, is because by using this as the data source, it's going to preload in that metadata that it knows about for the value for this environment and give us access to all this. So that's why this is really, really powerful, because we don't have that ability by just using a function or using a formula, or we'd have to come in here and update this value. So it knows what that metadata is, and it knows we can do something. So maybe we'll do something like, actually, I wonder if I can create a file. I don't know anything about SharePoint, so we'll see if this works. Test. Oh. I don't know. Let's have a look at my OneDrive. We need some content for the file, so we'll go get file content. Cool. Do that one. I wonder what we've got in here. Let's have a look. Test.jpg. That doesn't sound ominous at all. Oh, Xena Warrior Princess. Let's use that one. Because who doesn't love a bit of Xena Warrior Princess every now and again? So that's a JPEG file. So this .jpg. And file content, we will choose the content from there. Cool. So let's see if this works. Because I have no idea if that's going to create a file, or if we can even attach files or create files here. It's going to be a fun experiment, because I love experimenting things that I've not tested before. I do them in public. Always fun. But if not, it'll at least show that we can use some environment variables. So I'll run the flow. Hey, it's green. Wow, surprised even me. Cool. So it did something. It created a file in somewhere. Maybe this one. Where is it? No, not that one. Where is it? Just disappeared, hasn't it? See, this is the problem with SharePoint. Everything disappears on you. That one. It created something here, maybe. Anyone from a SharePoint background, what a shout out if there's something I'm missing. I created it in a list. I don't know why.
You shouldn't be able to do that. That's
well,
is there not a link in the actual flow that will link to it? Like if you just go to the output of it, there should be something that.
Well, the weird thing is in lists you usually create items and not files.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. You broke the SharePoint.
Yeah, you can only attach an item to a file to an already existing item, actually, but you can't create an item in a list from scratch, I guess.
Well, that's
at least
I've
never seen
something happened.
Something that happened successfully, actually.
So yeah, so it's pretty successful there. I managed to create something that you're not supposed to. But hey, item ID -1. Well, yeah. I should have probably created an item from the list. That would have been a smart idea, but I didn't think about that. So, oh well.
We'll leave the recording off the YouTube channel.
Yeah, but I mean, the point is that we can use the environment variable. it knows the metadata because it knows the site. We no longer have to create some sort of crazy if statements like if in production, then use this URL, else use this URL. We no longer need to come into this flow and change the URL manually. We can actually just use the data source. So I think that's really cool. It's going to be really great when they bring in the Dataverse and the SQL connector as well. So cool. That's number one. Let's get rid of this. So number two. So there are these other types of environment variables. So like the VG and bar. What I was doing at the start. So there are these other types. And in my experience, it's great to have these other types because you can come in and you can go, okay, I want to store a URL. I want to store an endpoint, an API endpoint that I'm going to be calling in multiple flows. It's going to change from live to production. I can store that as a text environment variable, and it works great. It does. Similarly, I can say, right, okay, is this production or is this sandbox? So I can have a flag that says, is this production, and choose yes or no. And again, in my flow, I can check at the start, is this production? Okay, go down this path. If it's not, go down this path. So again, really handy, or is this switched on? Really handy things. But one of the most advanced, or one of the advanced techniques I've been using at the moment is to use JSON instead of any of these. And there's a reason. The reason is that using a JSON object will actually allow us to use all of these pieces of data, but from a single point. And the reason why that's good is that when you're importing your solution into your next environment, instead of having to go and update 10 different text environment variables, 3 different yes/no environment variables, 4 different decimal environment variables, you can update a single environment variable, and you can then still use that across all your flows. So that's why I use this all the time, and I want to share this with you today. So we'll choose JSON. What we'll do is we'll take Visual Studio Code, which is over here. We'll zoom in a little bit. Zoom in a little bit. We won't zoom in a little bit. I just wrote a JSON object here with just a few different pieces of data. So org name is the developer org name for my organization. I've got my environment ID, which again, quite useful in terms of using Flow. Azure key name, because you don't want to use environment variables for things like client secrets. For those, you want to use Azure Key Vault. But you need a name to then use in Azure Key Vault to go off and retrieve that secret ID and bring it back. So you could store the name of that key in here, and then you can just pass this to your Azure Key Vault, and then it'll bring it back. We have the environment name, so if it's sandbox or not. We have an environment prefix. Again, environment prefixes are really useful. It may not seem it, but it's really useful in terms of if you're creating SharePoint sites, if you're creating Office 365 groups, if you're creating email addresses and things like that. If you prefix them with SB, excuse me, then at the end of your UAT, you can just search in Azure Active Directory for anything beginning with SB and mass delete everything. I mean, check it first, but you just delete everything. You could have maybe your API endpoints. This is the one for Dataverse or Dynamics, but this could be just any endpoint that you have in here. And I've also stored the app ID. So the app ID for my sales app for Dynamics. So I can store multiple pieces of information inside of here rather than having to go and update 10, 20 environment variables. So let's take a look at it now. My current annoyance with this is that I can't, there's no formatting in here, which is super annoying. So I just put everything in VS Code and just have a nicely formatted version somewhere that I can edit. So click on save, and that'll go and create my environment variable. And then I should have a flow around here somewhere. If you can leave it there's a flow here. Environment variable flow. That's the one I was working on earlier. That. So cool. Let's delete that. So I can just dump my environment variable right into here. And so this is the new way to interact with environment variables. They're all listed here at the very top. You can see all our different environment variables. We've got the SharePoint one here, which is available, and all the other ones that we've been previously using, and some built-in ones. So if I dump this in here, you may notice that I don't have access to the content. So I don't have access to my environment URL. I don't have access to my app ID. It's a bit of a problem. But what we can do is we can use one of the most useful actions in Power Automate, which is parse JSON. So in the content up here, we throw in the environment variable, and we need the schema. Now you can just write the schema if you want, but who has the time? So all we do is just copy that again, and we chuck that into the sample payload editor, and we click done, and then it's just going to automatically know what we want. And then from there, in our direct content for outputs, we have all of the different things for our environment variables. So we have our Azure key name that we could put in Azure Key Vault. We have our environment prefix if we want to create Office 365 groups and have them prefixed with the sandbox or the live prefixes, so that we know which ones we can delete and which ones we shouldn't delete, because your data will get muddled up. You can tell I've used a lot of environment variables recently in a lot of big complex projects. So I think this is really useful. So what we could do, for instance, is one of the main issues we have with the current model-driven apps is that they all use app IDs. So with an app ID, it means that you're going to open a specific app for your user. So one of the most common things we used to do in Dynamics is when a record was created, we'd send an email. The email would have a link. You click the link, it would open your Dynamics, and you'd be able to get access to that record. With the model-driven apps, it was a little bit more difficult because they've now added in these app IDs and things like that. And again, if these app IDs will change between live and production, as most of them do, then you kind of run into issues where your code will be out of date. So there are ways to get your app IDs and things like that straight out of Power Automate, but this is just so much easier. So what we do is we delete that. And we create, what do we want? Maybe an email? Email sounds good. Let's create an email. Oh no, not that email. Let's create a proper email. Office 365 Outlook. Send an email. And we're going to send it to me. Matt Collins, that dude. Link to record, and then in here what we'll do is we will add a link in. So click this link, do that, and we will switch to code, and then in here we'll add some HTML code. If I can write it, equals. And then at the end of this, we'll put backslash. You can just add a link in the other way, but that's fine. So what we want is do we have our thing? No, we don't. That's fine. What we want is this URL. So we want this Dynamics thing first, and we want app ID. Copy this out of here. So again, another great thing that you could store in an environment variable is this URL here. And then what we'll do, we've got the app ID, and we will open app ID, take that, put that in there, and then that's going to know what that is. And then after that, we can put in this bit of code here, which is basically just saying, right, okay, open the page. The page is entity record. The entity record is a quote, and the ID of the quote is this. So actually, we'll just take all of this. We're just doing this for testing. And we can put that in after here. And that should be all we need. And we'll just test this manually. Test. But the idea is that as you move through the environments, as you make these changes, as all this data changes, all your flows don't need updating. I'm doing projects with like hundreds of flows at the moment, and to go into hundreds of flows after a deployment is just not feasible. Damien, you had a question.
I think you've got a rogue D in your URL.
No one likes a rogue D. Let's see. I think my thing won't work. Oh, Outlook, that one. We'll go back and we'll edit to rogue D.
Just before on the second line. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Is that the rogue D? Does this work? Error details. There we go. Let's try that again. Get rid of the rogue D. Save and test. And we'll see if that comes in here. Run successfully, yay. Come on. Let's try this again. Click this link this time. And there we go. So it opens the record. But the great thing about this is that as I'm moving through those environments, I'm not having to change the name. I'm not having to go into each one of these environment variables and change it. I can change it from a single location, and I can update it as well. So, for instance, we've got environment URL. And no, not that one. We want this one. Put that in there, put that there, add comment there. And then, yeah, we could use this instead. So we can put this into our environment variable. We can go back and we can update it. And it just makes everything so much simpler. But again, there's no thing. There is this that you should be aware of as well. Remove this value before exporting it if it shouldn't be used in other environments. So there are two values there. So there's the default value and the current value. If when you export your solution, you still have stuff in the current value, it will use that in the new environment. So the idea is you should probably really just put it in this one up here. And Flow will automatically, Power Automate will automatically know which one you want to use. It will always use the current value overriding from the default value. So that's that. So you update it. Again, one of the problems with environment variables is the fact that they do not update until you deactivate a flow or reactivate a flow, which is kind of annoying. So if I was to test this now, if I do this, so my flow's trying to know that my flow's trying to know that I have an environment variable called app. Where is it? App ID. what did I call it? Environment URL. That easy to remember name. Where is it? Environment URL. Yeah, it should be there. It doesn't even know. Oh, no, there it is. It's right down the bottom. Right there. Right there. Right where I forgot it was. Just not look at the wrong thing. There we go, that one. So now I have both bits in there, and that's all good. But if I save and test this now, theoretically, it's not going to know about that new one, and it'll come back as blank. Come on. Ivan makes a point about app logical names. Yeah, you can use app logical names in here to get to the correct apps that you're wanting to link to. It's a completely valid thing to do as well. Yeah, it doesn't want to do it now. It's getting shy. That's all. Does anyone have any questions or any scenarios that they've been through with environment variables or any gotchas? For me, the biggest gotcha is remembering to take out the current value if you're moving it between organizations, between environments, and also remembering to turn it on and off again. Oh, it's broken everything. Who let me do this? Completely broken now. See, this is why it's completely unsupported. You shouldn't reopen flows. If I do this manually, I still think that's really blank. But yeah. Oh, we got an email. That's good. Oh no, it's actually got it now. Hey, look at that. How interesting is that? It knows. So environment variables are getting better. Even my attempt to break it here did not succeed. But yeah, I just think that although you're going to be using an extra step here to parse the JSON to then get that environment variable, if you are querying each one of these environment variables separately, and you have to put them into various places in your flow each time, it's going to be doing calls to the database each time. So rather than do that and kind of have that overhead of go look up this environment variable, go look up that environment variable, go look up this one, then write this to a single record, whereas that's like 4 steps. This is more, you get the environment variable once, you chunk it into pieces, you put that in your flow, and then it's just on one call to the database to get the environment variable, and then it's one call to write the data as well. So you're not going to see, great performance overheads with that, but you will see fewer API calls because it will be a call to the database each time to get each one of the environment variables. And again, just really simple use case for putting everything inside a data block. So I have one usually called environment settings, contains loads of this information. Each one of my flows just parses it at the start and gets all the information out. And that was all I really wanted to show tonight. I just don't think environment variables are getting enough love. They have great use cases for ALM. They have great use cases for things like SharePoint now with those additional data source connectors. There's so much you can do with like the additional things in environment variables in the different types now. And it's a lot easier to use because last time we had to like do either 2 list records or 1 list record with the expand query to get the right value. Because they're stored in 2 different tables inside Dataverse, we now have this really easy environment variable picker that is at the top of every single flow that you can use and get those environment variables out. So yeah, that's what I wanted to cover tonight. So does anyone have any questions, any stories about environment variables that they want to go through?